Oh no, here we go. Not another AI flock video. I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting pretty much sick and tired of talking about this stuff. But I'm going to continue to talk about it as much as I need to, because there's something else going on in the background behind this whole flock situation that I think is a much bigger story, and nobody's talking about it. And I just want to throw this out there. This is not a flock AI video per se, so I want to get that out of the way. Don't think that's all this is. This is something much bigger, and I want to start this off just by showing you a couple images. And please do not make this political, because this is not political. All right, this is much bigger than politics, because the way I feel about politics is it's just one large effort to divide us even further than what we already are. Left, right, center, it doesn't matter. It's pretty much all the same, and no matter which way you spin it, these people do not seem to have our best interests in mind. But I want you to look at these images, starting with this one, and think about what this image represents. What does this signify? All right, now that you've thought about it, look at this image. What does this image signify? What do you think is happening here? Or what is the deeper meaning behind this? Because at first glance, when I first saw these images and I saw the videos and stuff of this happening, I thought, it's kind of odd, you know, the standing president of the United States is standing on his, his stage, his world stage, with some of the richest people in the country and now in the world, and they just happen to be CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, the largest corporations. And then the more I thought about this, and the more I started thinking about the flock camera situation and the AI and stuff that's basically being built around us, because none of us really voted for this stuff. We didn't ask for it. We didn't sign a document saying, hey, we want flock cameras in our communities. We want AI infrastructure and these giant warehouses to be built in our communities. We want to displace our farmland. Nobody asked for any of this stuff, but it's being built regardless. And I think that kind of signifies something also. But I think together, when you combine all these things, and you combine all the other things that are happening in this country, and not just this country, but around the world, and I would say in most Western countries, there is a larger story that begins to kind of tell itself. And that story, to me, kind of brings out the highlights of every single dystopian movie we've ever seen growing up. I'm talking about the big ones from the 80s and 90s, Demolition Man and Elysium and Terminator. I mean, there's so many of them. It's really hard to name them all, but if you think about all the dystopian movies where it was basically like this elite class, that, these really rich people and this very powerful government that kind of join forces, and they basically control everything, and it basically turns it into a surveillance and police state. And then, they go off and they live their best life. They live in these extravagant homes, or maybe in some cases like Elysium, they go to the oasis up in space, and they get to have all the health care and all the great food in this paradise, while the plebs, us peasants down here on Earth, we get to live in this barren wasteland that they've created after they've sucked up all the resources and destroyed the natural world. And I don't want to make this dystopian or negative, but that's just kind of what I'm seeing here. And I'm not saying this is even true. I'm not saying this is the future we're headed towards, but I just want to kind of set the stage on this, because from somebody sitting on the outside looking in, connecting the dots, it seems like that could be a possibility. Because knowing what I know now, after really taking my time to look into this stuff and doing some research and just connecting the dots, these two images, they paint an entirely different story than what they did at the very beginning when I first saw them. Because what I see now when I look at these images is I see the fact that the middle and lower class are kind of being destroyed, and it seems like they're taking away pretty much everything they can from us, from, I would say, the citizens, and they're handing that over to these companies, to these private firms and corporations and things like that. And there's a lot of evidence to back this up, so let's just start off with Flock. I'm sure most of y'all know that Flock is a privately owned company. They're not publicly traded yet, but I'm sure they will be. And what Flock has basically done is they've sold their equipment to all these law enforcement agencies, and it's for surveillance, it's for, monitoring the public and fighting crime and all this stuff. But what is not being told, or what's not talked about often enough, is the fact that the law enforcement agencies buy this equipment, but that equipment does not function without being tied to the AI data center or, the infrastructure. So yes, they own the equipment, but they don't actually own Flock. That's the problem here. So they are now reliant on these private companies. And it's not just about being reliant on them and having a perpetual payment or a subscription. It's about the fact that by doing this, they are merging law enforcement with a corporation. They're merging law enforcement with a privately owned company. And if you think about how much law enforcement is now relying on these Flock cameras, how much they're using them to fight crime and surveil the public, it's pretty significant. As a matter of fact, I've heard these law enforcement officers and, these law enforcement agencies talk about how they're basically leaning on Flock to fight crime and to look for people. They're pulling a lot of that work away from the actual officers, and they're allowing technology to do that work for them. And that is especially true now that they have drones and stuff they're sending out, because they can send a drone out and it can surveil an entire area instead of having to send an officer out in a cop car to go look around on the streets. But that is the deeper meaning here, is that the thing that's being sent out to look for us, the public, the citizen, is not an officer. It is not a federal agent. It is not someone that is part of our government. That is a privately owned company that is out searching for the people. Think about that and let that sink in. And, reflect back on some of those dystopian movies I was talking about before and think about how this ties into that. And it's not just the police. We're talking about the military. Because if you think about all these military robots and stuff, they're talking about, making and putting into our military. It's the same concept. The military or the government buys these robots. They buy these autonomous vehicles. But that autonomous vehicle does not work without the AI infrastructure backing it up. The moment it's disconnected from that, it becomes a paperweight. And that has not been true throughout any other point throughout history, if you think about it, because yes, we have, these large defense contractors out there. But the way it stands right now is that the government can go to Boeing and they can buy an airplane and they can fly that airplane anywhere they want in the entire world. That plane does not have to be tied to Boeing. Yes, it might need to go back there for repairs, maintenance, software, upgrades, things like that. But it does not require Boeing for it to function. There's some autonomy there. With this newer stuff, there is no longer autonomy, there is reliance. This equipment is completely reliant on these companies because the company owns the soul of the equipment. If the soul of the equipment, aka the AI and the stuff that makes the equipment function, if it leaves that equipment, it becomes an empty vessel. It is useless. And there's a major problem here because the government works for us. We pay taxes. Our taxes pay for our government. But when you have a corporation and a private company in the mix, we're not paying for that private company. That private company does not work for the people. That private company works for their shareholders. It works for profit. And it also does not have to abide by the same laws and regulations as the government does, which means that it does not have to abide by our laws and our regulations. It can do whatever it wants. And that's kind of scary because we see that with corporations today. And here's a prime example of that. Some platforms do not allow freedom of speech. They will ban you from talking about certain words and certain topics. And they're allowed to do that because they own that platform. It's a privately owned company. It is their platform. They can make up whatever rules they want for that platform. If you don't like it, find another platform. They can kick you off of it because of that stuff. So that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this. There are so many loopholes and ways around these laws and regulations, and I would say even things in the Constitution when it comes to privately owned companies. Because let's think about it this way. If you live in America, you have the right to bear arms. But if you walk inside of a establishment that is owned by a company, a private company or a corporation, they can legally have a sign on the door that says no firearms allowed. And they're allowed to do that. So think about the implications of this. Think about what that means when our government merges with corporations. What does it mean when they merge with private companies? And it doesn't just stop with AI and surveillance and flock cameras and all that stuff, because this ties into everything. We're now seeing that corporations are basically taking over the housing market. Not just corporations, but private equity. All these investment firms and stuff are buying up houses. That is fewer houses that we the people can hold. We're now seeing that private companies and corporations are buying up land. They're buying up our food industry. You know, a lot of the farms and stuff are going out of business, and these large corporations are buying up all the farmland, not just for food production, for big industry food, but also for data centers and technological infrastructure, and just for developments in general, housing, things like that. We're now seeing this with electric, because we have companies like BlackRock and stuff that are buying up electric companies. They're buying up utility companies. And a lot of the reason for that is because utility bills are going to skyrocket. As a matter of fact, electricity is probably going to become kind of scarce, or at least, you know, the demand is going to outpace the amount they can produce, and that means more money. So these equity firms, these private equity firms, they're buying up utility companies, and they're doing that for money. They're doing that for control. We're also seeing this with water, because water obviously is becoming more and more scarce because, again, data centers are consuming tremendous amounts of water. There is a water crisis going on in a lot of places, and they're calling for an even worse water crisis in the future, because apparently we're losing access to a lot of our drinking water. It's being consumed at rates faster than it's being replenished in the ground. So some of the largest water utilities are now being publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And just like everything else, they're being gobbled up by private equity, by these investment firms. But it doesn't even stop there. And this is where the picture really starts to paint itself, because something else that's owned by a private company is our voting. I mean, think about this. How do most people vote today? They vote on an electronic machine. Guess who owns those electronic voting machines? Dominion. Dominion is a privately owned company. So we are now merging our government with a privately owned company, and we're putting all of our trust and all of this power into the hands of a company, of a corporation. And the icing on the cake here is that that is probably also going to be true in the very near future for our money. Because right now we have paper money. But when that goes away, and it will go away, and we move to digital currency, that digital currency is going to be owned and controlled most likely by the same people that own all of this other technology. The Larry Ellisons, the Sam Altmans. Because if it's stored on a server somewhere, that means that server and that facility that houses that server is owned by a corporation somewhere. And if that doesn't make this clear enough, as of 2026, the US government now holds over $27 billion in corporate stakes spread across over 30 different companies. What does that sound like to you? To me, that sounds like that there is a merger that is happening right before our eyes. And that is the fact that the government seems to be merging with these corporations. It seems that it is becoming one large entity. And it seems that that is going to be our future. It will no longer be us and the government. It will be us and the government that is owned by, or that is at least wrapped up in, corporate industry. Does that mean that this is the end of the private sector? Does it mean that this is the end of autonomy and the lower and middle class? What does that mean for us? I think this is one of the most important questions in modern times, because it seems that this shift is in fact occurring. And I can't help but wonder, what does this shift mean for us? Where is this going to lead us? Are we truly going to be in a situation where us, the people, us, the citizens, own nothing, and it's all owned by corporate interests and private equity, which would then therefore mean that it's also owned by the government? Because it sure seems that that's the way things are headed. And not only is it headed that way, it's headed that way very, very quickly. And I cannot help but wonder if the reason that the President of the United States went on the world stage with these CEOs of these companies, because they're trying to prepare us for what is coming. They're trying to tell us, maybe They're trying to condition us. And if you think about how often this happens today, it really makes you wonder if that is in fact the case. But with all that said, what can we do about this? Is there anything that we need to do? Or is this just the next necessary step to take us to this future that we're all kind of headed towards right now? And I really don't have the answer to that, because I think this really comes down to your own personal beliefs, whether or not you think this is a good thing or a bad thing. For some people, maybe it means just kind of weighing it out, seeing what the lesser of the two evils are. For me personally, I have no idea what version of the future is going to play out, and that is exactly why I'm preparing for every version I can possibly think of. I'm trying to get my mind right. I'm trying to wrap my head around all this stuff. And I'm trying to just, I'm trying to navigate this the best way I possibly can, which is, it's tough because none of us know where this is headed. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't see the future. I wish we could, but that's not the reality. The reality is only what we can currently see. And what we can currently see really comes down to your perception. How do you perceive the situation we're in? How do you perceive these images? And based off your perception and your own unique view, how do you think this is all going to play out?